Montana Territory, 1889, a ranch at the edge of the known world. One quiet man, Eli Hart, raising three children who don't share his blood. One travel-worn teacher, Clara Morgan, who whispers the hardest truth a woman can say: I can't have children. He smiles back. Steady as a fence post after a storm. Good. I've got enough love for both. But what makes a family out here blood? Or the ones who stay when the wind turns cruel, when a government writer comes with papers sharp as knives? Can love stand up to the law when fever takes a little girl and the river eats the bridge? Will a father's ride cost him everything? And can a woman branded empty become the heartbeat of a home? Under a big sky that keeps secrets, small acts carry thunder, a note by the kettle, a hand on a brow, letters written by lamplight. Who belongs, who decides, and how far would you go to keep what you've found at the end of the world, if stories of grit, grace, and second chances speak to you? Tap. Like, share this with a friend who needs hope, and subscribe to Wild West Echoes. Saddle up. Let's ride into the story. Montana Territory, 1889. The sun slid behind the distant peaks, washing the fields in bronze. The air smelled of dust and sage, of a day that had worked itself nearly to silence. Grass swayed in long ripples, and somewhere far off, a hawk called once and was gone. Eli Hart drove another nail into the fence rail. Each strike fell steady, patient. He wasn't a man who hurried. The land didn't answer to speed, only to endurance. His shirt was damp, the sleeves rolled above weathered forearms, darkened by years beneath a western sky. The wind changed, carrying something unfamiliar, a rattle of wheels, a rhythm too careful to belong to cattle or storm. Eli straightened. Down the narrow road came a wagon drawn by a tired mare, a gray one with its ribs showing through the hide. The driver was a woman. She sat high, shoulders square though the miles had worn the color from her dress. When she reached the gate, she reined in and let the dust settle before speaking. "You're Eli Hart." "That's me." His voice was low, even, as if shaped by the same wind that bent the cottonwoods. She climbed down. Boots hit the ground with a soft thud. Her gloves were torn at the fingertips, and her hat had lost its ribbon. Yet her manner carried a quiet dignity, the kind born not of pride, but of survival. "My name's Clara Morgan," she said. "I was told you keep 3 children here. I'm a teacher, looking for work." Eli leaned on the fence post. "Town's a fair ride east." "Why come all the way out here?" She hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't sound like pleading, because the town already said no. He studied her a moment longer. Her eyes were the color of riverstone, steady but tired. He asked softly, "You got any children of your own?" She drew a breath, slow and deliberate, then said it the way one pulls a splinter quick, before courage runs out. "I can't have children." The sentence landed between them, quiet but heavy. No apology, no drama, just the truth set down like a small offering. Eli looked at her for a long while. The wind flicked the brim of his hat. The fence wire hummed faintly. Then he smiled not wide, not pitying, just the kind of smile that means I heard you, and it's all right. "Good," he said. "I've got enough love for both." Clara blinked. A flush rose to her cheeks, half surprise, half disbelief. "I beg your pardon." He set the hammer on the post. "I meant what I said. This place has more heart than hands most days." Something in his tone disarmed her, the calm certainty of a man who didn't speak unless the words were true. From the corral came a whinny and the quick patter of small boots. A boy appeared about 11, sun-blonde hair sticking up, freckles bright against tanned skin. "Luke," Eli said, "fetch your sisters." Yes, sir. The boy ran off, calling into the house. A moment later, two girls followed him out. Ruth, 8, her braid coming loose. Maggie, 4, dragging a wooden doll missing one arm. They stopped near the porch, shy, studying the stranger. Clara smiled. Hello? Ruth whispered to Luke. She's awful dusty. Clara laughed, a small, surprised sound she hadn't made in months. That's what Miles will do to you. Maggie peeked from behind her brother. Are you the new preacher? Nope, sweetheart, Clara said. Just someone who likes words. Words, Maggie frowned. Do they bite? Only if you throw 'em too hard. The children giggled, the tension slipping away like dust in rain. Eli's eyes softened. He motioned toward the house. Come on in. Supper's near. Inside smelled of beans, wood smoke, and soap. The room was neat chairs, straight, floor swept, tools hung in quiet order. Yet there were traces of tenderness, a drawing pinned to the wall, a small pair of boots beside the door, a half-finished quilt folded over a chair. Eli pointed to a narrow room off the kitchen. You can stay here? It's plain, but the roof holds. Clara stepped inside. A single lamp waited on the table. She touched the quilt, sturdy, patched with mismatched squares. Each stitch told of patience. This will do fine, she said. He nodded once. We start early. Chores first, then lessons. I'll pay what I can. That's more than fair. As he turned to leave, her gaze caught an old cradle tucked beneath the window. Empty, but polished clean. She looked away before he could notice. After supper, the children drifted off to bed. The house grew still except for the pop of the fire. Clara sat by the small window, watching moonlight spill across the yard. She could see Eli out by the barn, feeding the mare a scoop of grain, moving slow and careful, as if gentleness were the only language he trusted. She whispered to herself, Good. I've got enough love for both. Testing the words, letting them settle. They felt strange, almost holy in their simplicity. Beyond the fence, coyotes sang, low and lonely. The wind pushed through the grass again, the same endless breath that had carried people west for generations, some chasing gold, some chasing freedom, a few just chasing a place that wouldn't send them away. Clara wondered which kind she was. When she finally blew out the lamp, the darkness wasn't hostile. It felt like the pause between heartbeats the moment before belonging begins, and if anyone had been close enough to hear, they might have caught her whisper to the night, maybe, that's enough for me, too. Before the first light touched the rim of the hills, Eli Hart was already awake. He didn't need an alarm. Habit was enough. Habit and the quiet voice of a man who had too much to keep alive to sleep late. He struck a match, lit the lamp, and poured yesterday's coffee into a tin pot. It was bitter as a winter wind, but warm, and that was all it needed to be. The kettle hissed. He poured a measure into his cup, black and steaming, and watched it swirl like smoke from old memories. Outside, the Hart Range waited the only place on earth that bore his name. He had built it fence by fence, board by board, over 10 long years since the war. No one had handed him anything. The soil was stubborn, the wind unkind, and yet here it stood a patch of land that answered only to him. He stepped onto the porch. Cold bit the edges of his breath. Stars were fading out, leaving a thin gray dawn over the far ridge. The smell of hay and horses hung in the air clean. Honest smells that didn't lie. Eli moved the way a man moves when every step already knows where it's going. He checked the troughs, swung the gate, and loosened the tack on an old bay mare named June. The leather creaked, the kind of sound that settles into a man's bones after years of use. He spoke to her softly. "Easy, girl. Morning's comin' slow today." She flicked an ear, trusting. Animals always trusted Eli. They could feel steadiness the way others felt warmth. The sky broke pale blue. A windmill turned lazy circles, squealing now and then, like a child refusing chores. From the bunkhouse chimney, a thin column of smoke climbed straight up. Luke must have stirred the fire early. The boy was quick that way, trying to prove himself already a man. Eli smiled, faint and proud. "Good kid," he murmured, tough hide, soft heart. He slung a saddle blanket over his shoulder and headed toward the barn. Each board of it carried some part of his history, the boards he'd split himself. The nails hammered by calloused hands, the smell of rain trapped in old wood. Inside, 3 stalls held 3 stories. One, the mare June. He'd traded 2 rifles and a winter's wages for her back in '81. Another stall, empty, still carried the name Hannah's Dream carved on a plank. He ran his hand over the faded letters. Hannah, his wife, gone 8 years now. Fever took her in a week, left silence that no prayer could fill. He didn't talk about her, not to the children, not to the preacher, not even to himself. But each morning he stopped at that empty stall, tracing the letters with a thumb until the ache felt manageable. He remembered her laugh, the way she'd hum while boiling coffee, how she used to call him steady as sunrise. Steady he'd tried to be that ever since. A shovel scraped behind him. Luke appeared, hair a mess, eyes half awake but willing. "Mornin', Pa." "Mornin', son." "You feed June. Workin' on it." The boy yawned, then straightened. Trying to match the man's posture, Eli handed him a rope. "Check the north fence after breakfast. Wind pushed hard last night." "Yes, sir." "Discipline. That's what kept this place from falling apart. Work first, always. Talk could wait. Feelings could wait longer." He watched the boy head out. Boots too big, determination too heavy. A pang of memory passed through himself at that age. Father gone to fight, mother holding a farm, together with little more than prayer and grit. Back then, he'd promised himself he'd never bring a child into such loneliness. Life had other plans. When the first orphan came, he was barely 8, Luke, standing by a burned barn outside Billings, face smeared with soot, clutching a broken halter like it might bring his folks back. Eli hadn't planned to keep him, but when he set the boy on his horse and felt that small, shaking hand grip his coat, something anchored deep inside him. Since that day, letting go never felt right. Ruth came next, a spring flood survivor, found clinging to a wagon board along the Musselshell River, and Maggie, the baby of them all, left at the church doorstep with nothing but a button doll and a fever that near took her. He'd fought that fever 3 nights straight, praying to a God he barely remembered believing in. When she finally opened her eyes, he promised her she'd never wake up alone again. Now they were his, not by paper, not by law, but by choice, and that was the only kind of family Eli understood. He carried a bale of hay to the corral, muscles burning pleasantly. The sun cleared the ridge. Light spilled gold over the field, touching the tops of the fence posts. He stopped to look, the same view every morning, and yet never the same. A man could live a lifetime in that silence. He could almost convince himself it was enough. Almost. He thought of Clara Morgan, the woman who'd arrived the evening before, polite, tired, with eyes that looked like they'd seen more loss than miles, She had spoken her truth without shame. I can't have children. The honesty of it had caught him off guard. He admired that. Out here, truth was rarer than water. And when he'd told her, good, I've got enough love for both. It wasn't a clever line, it was instinct, maybe mercy. Now, standing in the morning light, he wondered what made her come this far west alone. The thought settled, uncomfortable, but curious. He wasn't used to wanting to know more about someone. He poured the last of his coffee onto the dirt and said quietly, "A man can live with silence. What he can't live with is not being needed." The words felt heavier than they should have. He glanced toward the house. Through the open window, he saw Clara moving about the kitchen, helping Ruth braid her hair. Maggie perched on the table, giggling. The sound carried faint across the yard, soft laughter, clumsy, real. Eli took off his hat and wiped his brow. The ache in his chest wasn't pain exactly, more like recognition. The kind of feeling you get when the wind shifts and smells like rain after months of dust. He turned back to the fence line, another nail to drive, another day to keep steady. But as he lifted the hammer, he caught himself listening for that laughter again. That was Eli Hart, a man carved by miles, tempered by loss, held together by duty. He didn't speak much, but when he did, the land listened. And maybe, just maybe, someone else had started listening too. By the time Clara Morgan reached the ridge above Hart Range, her mare was limping and her throat was dry as bone dust. She'd been riding for 4 days, sleeping in barns when folks allowed it, under sky when they didn't. The West had a way of testing how badly a person wanted a new beginning. Clara had failed many tests back east, lost a child, lost a marriage, lost the taste for belonging, but not hope. Hope was stubborn. It sat beside her on that wagon bench, quiet but breathing. She could still hear her mother's voice, distant now. A woman without children has no home. Maybe that was true once, maybe not here. The sun was lowering behind the mountains when she saw the ranch for the first time, fences stretching wide, barn roof glinting dull silver, a windmill turning lazy circles above the wheatgrass. It looked neither rich nor poor, just steady. And steady was what she needed most. She stopped the mare near the gate, adjusted her hat, and let the silence gather around her. Wind whispered through wire. Somewhere a hammer struck wood steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that refused to quit. She followed the sound. The man at the fence didn't notice her at first. Broad shoulders, sleeves rolled, hat pulled low. When he turned, the light caught the side of his face, rugged, sunburned, carved by wind and work. Eli Hart. He didn't say anything right away. Just looked at her the way ranchers look at a storm, measuring whether it'll pass or stay. Clara cleared her throat. "Sir, I was told you might have need of a teacher." His hammer paused midair. "Who told you that?" "The folks at the post office in town. Said you keep children here." "That's true." He rested one boot on the rail. "You come alone?" "Yes." He waited. She understood what he wasn't asking. She took a breath, kept her voice steady. "My husband passed 2 years ago. I lost the baby before that." Silence stretched. The sound of the windmill filled it. Then she added, "Quieter, I can't have children." The doctor said it plain. She didn't mean it as confession, just a fact, like saying the river runs north. But it still cost something to speak it aloud. Eli didn't turn away, didn't shift his weight. He only nodded once, eyes thoughtful. "Then maybe you'll fit just right here," he said. She blinked. "How's that?" He smiled slightly. "This place already has more children than sense. Could use someone who knows what to do with both. For the first time in months, she felt a laugh rise small and rusty, but real. He tipped his hat toward the house. Come on in. Supper's not fancy, but it's hot. The porch steps creaked under her boots. The smell of stew met her halfway. A good smell. Pepper and beans and smoke. Inside, the walls glowed amber in lamplight. Simple place pine table, cast iron stove, shelves lined with canning jars. But everything had a purpose. Everything spoke of care. 3 sets of eyes stared at her from the table. Kids, Eli said. This here's Miss Morgan. She's gonna help you with your letters. The boy, Luke, straight-backed and sharp-eyed, gave a slow nod like a soldier saluting. Evening, ma'am, the girl beside him. Ruth offered a half-smile. You came all the way from town, farther than that. The smallest, Maggie, stood on her chair, clutching a doll with one button eye. She didn't speak, just looked. Eli poured stew into bowls. Eat before it cools. Then bed. During supper, conversation moved like the wind, soft, unpredictable. Ruth asked questions between bites. Luke kept watchful silence. Maggie dipped her bread and hummed to herself. Clara mostly listened, feeling the rhythm of their small world, the scrape of spoons, the hush between sentences, the gentle authority in Eli's tone when one of them fidgeted too much. After dishes were cleared, she helped wipe the table. Eli thanked her with a nod. You'll have the small room off the kitchen. Roof leaks a bit in heavy rain. I'm used to that. You start lessons tomorrow. Yes, if they're willing. They'll be willing. He glanced toward the children already yawning. They just don't know it yet. Later, when the house settled into quiet, she unpacked her satchel, 2 books, a worn shawl, a folded photograph of her younger self holding a baby that never breathed. She placed the photo face down. The window beside her was open an inch. Through it she saw Eli in the yard, lantern swinging from his hand, checking the barn locks. His movements were slow, deliberate. Not the kind of man who spoke about care, but one who lived it. Clara leaned her head against the window frame. Back east, she'd been looked at with pity or suspicion. Here, she'd been looked at with plain acceptance. It unsettled her more than she expected. She whispered to the dark, "What if I stay and ruin it?" The wind outside answered with nothing but calm. She undressed, slipped beneath the quilt. The bed smelled faintly of cedar and soap. From the other room came a child's sleepy murmur. Ruth, maybe, or Maggie. The sound was small, comforting. She hadn't slept near such sounds since before her loss. It stirred something tender, dangerous. Lamplight flickered on the wall, painting gold against wood grain. She watched it dance and fade. Her eyes grew heavy, but her heart kept working, busy with thoughts that had nowhere to go. Was this a beginning, or just another stop before being told to move along? She didn't know, but as she drifted toward sleep, one image stayed clear. Eli's half-smile under that wide Montana sky. The way he'd said, "Then maybe you'll fit just right here." The words rolled again in her mind, steady, gentle, almost prayer. Outside, the wind slowed. Inside, for the first time in years, she didn't dream of leaving. The next morning rose pale and clean. Mist hung low over the pasture, the kind that makes every sound seem softer, as if the world itself were listening. Clara Morgan tied back her hair, rolled her sleeves, and stepped into the parlor. Dust floated in the sunbeams, slicing through the curtains, bright motes swirling like slow snow. She smiled. "Seems the house is ready for a little learning," she murmured. The children gathered uncertainly by the doorway. Luke, arms folded. Ruth, clutching a scrap of paper. Maggie, thumb in her mouth, eyes wide. Eli lingered behind them, hat in hand. "Go on," he said quietly. "Do as Miss Morgan says." Clara knelt on the floor and drew a wide circle in the dust with a stick. "All right," she said. "This is the letter O. Can you see it?" Ruth nodded, whispering, "Like the moon." "Exactly. Like the moon." And this, she drew a line beside it. "This is an I, straight and tall, like Luke standing guard." The boy flushed, half proud, half embarrassed. Maggie giggled, her small hand tracing a wobbly circle of her own. Outside, the windmill groaned. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped. Inside, the house began to breathe a new rhythm. Scratches of sticks, quiet laughter, the low hum of words taking shape. Eli leaned in the doorway, watching. His boots were dusty, his hands still rough with morning work. He didn't say a thing, but his eyes followed every motion, the way Clara's hand rested gently over Ruth's, guiding her letters. The patience in her tone, the little smile when Maggie finally made her crooked O. He'd seen hard work of every kind, hauling fence, breaking horses, soldiering in weather that turned men to ghosts, but nothing steadied him like watching those small hands learn. At noon, Clara wiped her palms on her skirt and stood. "That's enough for one morning. Minds work better with full stomachs." The children ran for the kitchen. Eli stepped forward, bent to look at the dusty scrawl on the floor. A trail of letters, crooked and faint, stretched like a path toward hope. He didn't comment, just gave a slow nod and said, "Looks good to me." That evening, after supper, the house grew quiet except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Clara sat by lamplight, needle in hand, sewing a tear in Ruth's sleeve. Outside, the night wind sighed through the shingles. She glanced toward the porch. Eli's boots weren't by the door where he usually left them. For a moment, she thought he'd gone to the barn. Then she heard a soft scrape. He was just outside, setting them down gently, careful not to wake the children sleeping in the loft above. A folded note rested on the table beside the kettle. The handwriting was blocky, awkward. For the kettle. Firewood, stacked. No signature, none needed. She smiled faintly. He moves like a man afraid his kindness might scare someone. It wasn't pity she felt, but recognition. People who'd known loss often loved. In small, careful ways, quiet gifts left without names attached. The fire crackled low. The lamplight trembled, as if breathing with the house. Clara kept sewing, thread, pulling through cloth, a steady rhythm that calmed her better than prayer. Around midnight, she woke to the faintest sound of floorboard whisper, the soft thud of tiny feet. She rose, heart quickening, and followed the noise into the hallway. Maggie stood halfway down the stairs, eyes open but unfocused, her small hand gripping the rail. The child was sleepwalking, lips moving in a murmur Clara couldn't catch. "Maggie," she whispered, stepping closer. "Sweetheart, it's all right." The girl didn't answer. A few more steps, and she'd reached the edge of the stair. Clara moved slow, quiet as breath. She knelt, slid an arm under the child, and lifted her against her chest. Maggie's head fell to her shoulder, the heat of sleep still clinging to her skin. "Let's go back, little one," Clara murmured. Rocking as she walked, she laid her down in bed, brushed stray curls from her forehead, and pulled the blanket up. For a moment, she watched the steady rise and fall of that small chest. Then she bent close and whispered, "You're safe. You're home." Maggie's lips curved faintly, still dreaming, ill. Clara sat beside the bed, until her own pulse slowed, then reached for the rag doll lying nearby. Its single button eye glinted in the dark. She placed it beside the girl's hand and stayed a while longer, listening to the wind hum outside. At dawn, the ranch stirred to life again. Eli found her already in the kitchen, pouring coffee. "You're up early," he said, voice rough from sleep. Couldn't rest. He noticed the faint circles beneath her eyes. "Everything all right?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Maggie walks at night. Best keep the stairs clear." Eli's brow furrowed. "She does that sometimes. I usually hear her. Don't worry," Clara said gently. "She's fine. She just needs someone to guide her back." Their eyes met his filled with quiet gratitude, hers with a calm she hadn't known she possessed. He nodded once, simple but sure. "Thank you." Days slipped by like dust through sunlight. Lessons in the parlor, chores in the yard, nights of soft laughter and shared silence. Eli spoke little, but his presence carried weight, the steady kind that made the house feel anchored. Clara began to understand that love out here didn't arrive with promises or flowers. It came in chores finished before dawn, in warm coffee waiting on the stove, in a note left by the kettle. She still caught hers, of a ball, waiting for the world to collapse the way it always had before. But each morning she woke to children's voices and the smell of hay and coffee, and found it still standing. That, she decided, was miracle enough. Now. Clara turned toward him, but he was already walking back inside, boots whispering against the boards. She smiled to herself. Some men spoke love in words, others left it in the shape of quiet evenings and full coffee pots. She was learning how to listen. The house slept, but Clara Morgan did not. She lay still in the narrow bed, quilt tucked to her chin, eyes fixed on the ceiling beams above. Outside, the moon carved pale light across the walls, soft as breath. Sleep had come quickly, until it turned cruel. She dreamed again the same one that followed her across half the country. A cradle, empty. The sound of rain on the roof, and her husband's voice sharp, weary, saying, "You were supposed to keep him safe." Even now, awake. Her hands trembled against the sheet. She pressed them flat, whispering to no one. "It wasn't my fault." The words felt useless. Small things tossed into an endless wind. She sat up, swung her feet to the floor. The boards were cold, the house still. Only the low creak of a chair came from the porch. Through the window, she saw Eli Hart, wrapped in his coat, a tin cup of coffee in his hands. He wasn't looking at anything, just sitting, breathing in the quiet. Clara hesitated, then reached for her shawl and stepped outside. The chill bit her skin, but it cleared her head. He glanced up, not surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" She shook her head. "No. You either." He gave a small shrug. "Never been good at it. The land gets up early, so I figure I might as well keep it company." She smiled faintly and took a seat on the step beside him. The wood was cool beneath her palms. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the faint buzz of insects and the soft clink as he set his cup down beside his boot. Then Eli said, "When I was 16, I rode with my brother, Caleb. Fever took him one summer, fast. His voice stayed low, steady. I buried him myself, out past the ridge. Promised I'd look after whatever was left worth keeping." He stared into the dark. "Guess that's what I've been doing since." Clara listened, not interrupting. There was a weight in his tone that didn't need pity, just space to exist. She knew that kind of pain, the kind that shaped how you breathed, how you trusted. She folded her hands in her lap. I had a son once, she said quietly. He didn't live past his first night. Eli turned slightly toward her, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. She continued, "Back east. They said I should try again. But I couldn't. Not just because my body wouldn't let me, but because I couldn't stand another grave." The air between them held still, fragile as frost. Eli nodded once, the motion small but full of understanding. "That's a kind of courage most folks don't talk about," he said. She looked at him, surprised. "Courage staying when you could run, keeping your heart open when it's been broke clean through. That's the hardest kind." She wanted to answer, but her throat closed. The words he'd spoken, simple, honest, landed deep, in the place where her grief had been quietly starving for kindness. They sat there, two silhouettes in the pale wash of moonlight, their losses laid bare without ceremony. He didn't reach for her hand. She didn't lean closer, but something passed between them, soft and certain, a recognition. "You know this ache too." After a time, he spoke again, almost to himself. "Sometimes I think the good Lord gives us silence so we can hear what matters." Clara exhaled slowly. "And what matters to you?" Mr. Hart. He took a sip of coffee, eyes still on the horizon. "Right now, that the ones sleepin' under this roof wake to another day." It wasn't much of an answer, but it was everything. Later. The lamp inside flickered low as Clara moved quietly through the hall. She stopped by Ruth's room. The girl was half awake, twisting in her blanket. "Miss Morgan," she murmured, "was that thunder no go?" "Sweetheart, just the wind." Ruth's eyes blinked open, heavy with sleep. "You sound like my mama used to." Clara froze. The words sank into her chest, deeper than breath. She smoothed the girl's hair back, forcing her voice steady. "Then you rest easy now. That's what mamas want most." Ruth nodded, already drifting. Her small hand found Clara's sleeve, held tight for a moment before letting go. Clara stood there a long while, the warmth of that touch still clinging to her arm. The air smelled faintly of soap and hay. Somewhere outside, Eli's boots crossed the porch, slow and careful. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like an intruder in someone else's home. She felt necessary. Before returning to bed, she paused by the window. The sky was lightening, just barely. A single star hung above the barn, the last one to fade. She whispered, "Thank you," though she wasn't sure to whom. To the man on the porch who didn't press her to speak. To the child who said, "You sound like my mama." Or maybe to the silence itself, the kind that healed more than words ever could. She went back to bed, pulling the quilt to her chin. Sleep came quietly this time, gentle as a lullaby, half remembered. No cradle, no accusing voice. Only the echo of Eli's words in her mind, keeping your heart open when it's been broke clean through. That's the hardest kind. It was a golden afternoon, the kind that fools you into thinking nothing bad can happen. The sun lay heavy across the range. Dust shimmered. The sky stretched clear and wide, no hint of trouble. Eli Hart was mending a saddle strap by the corral. Luke had taken the roan gelding out to practice his riding, too eager, too sure of himself. The boy had grown fast that summer, strong enough to think he couldn't fall. Eli looked up once, shading his eyes. "Keep it steady." Son Luke grinned back, proud and wild, and nudged the horse into a trot. The gelding's hooves drummed against the packed dirt, rhythm quickening. Then a startled cry, the sudden crash of wood. The world broke apart in a second. The horse reared. Luke pitched sideways, hit the ground hard. The sound of his fall cut clean through the air, final, heavy, wrong. Luke Eli ran. Tools dropped, heart hammering. He slid to his knees beside the boy. Luke was pale, breath coming sharp and fast, one arm bent at an angle that made Eli's stomach twist. God, don't move. Son. Don't panic, cracked his voice. He'd seen men hurt in war, but never like this, not someone he called his own. Ruth stood frozen near the fence, Maggie clutching her skirts, both too scared to speak. Then Clara appeared, running from the house, skirts hitched in her hands. What happened? He fell. His arm, Eli's voice broke. He couldn't finish. She dropped to the ground beside Luke, all motion and calm. Luke, look at me. Can you hear my voice? He nodded weakly, teeth clenched. All right, she said, steady as stone. You're going to be fine. We just need to keep you still. Her tone changed the air itself, sharp fear shifting into order. She turned to Ruth, fetched 2 straight boards from the woodpile. Maggie, bring me a clean towel. Hurry, but don't run. The girls scattered, grateful to have something to do. Eli knelt opposite, hands shaking uselessly. Tell me what you need. Hold him steady, she said, voice gentle but firm. He'll try to pull away. He nodded, bracing the boy's shoulders while she worked. When Ruth returned with the boards, Clara tore her apron into long strips, wrapping them tight around Luke's arm. He whimpered once, biting back a sob. I know, she whispered. It hurts now, but that means your body's still strong. That's good. That's very good. Her hands moved quick but careful, not a motion wasted. When the splint was tied, she brushed the sweat from his brow with the edge of her sleeve. There, she murmured. See, still you. Still brave. Luke's breath eased by degrees. The pain didn't vanish, but the fear did. Eli sat back on his heels, watching her. For the first time, he saw Clara not as a teacher or a guest, but as something far rarer, a woman who turned chaos into calm just by standing in it. She moved like someone who had done this before, maybe in another life, maybe for a child she never got to keep. He swallowed hard. Thank you. She looked up, dirt on her hands, strands of hair loose around her face. You'd have done the same for me. He wanted to tell her no. He wouldn't have known how, but words failed. She smiled, small and tired, helped me get him inside. Together they lifted Luke, careful as carrying glass. Eli held the door open while Clara cleared a place on the couch, laid the boy down, and covered him with a blanket. The rest of the day passed in slow rhythm, changing cloths, cooling fever, quieting worry. By evening, Luke slept, his arm bound neatly, his breathing soft and even. The house finally exhaled. Ruth sat on the floor, Maggie curled in her lap, both too drained to speak. Eli leaned in the doorway, head bowed, hat in hand. Miss Morgan, he said softly, I don't think I've ever seen anyone so calm under God's own trial. She shook her head. It's not calm. It's just remembering how to keep moving when stopping would hurt worse. He stared at her, unsure what to say. Her eyes were wet, but steady. He's strong. He'll mend. Eli nodded. Because of you. Clara looked away, voice barely above a whisper. Because he mattered. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Eli sat alone on the porch. The moon hung low and gold. Crickets sang. His hands rested on his knees, calloused and still trembling. He thought of the boy's face, of Clara's calm, of the way she'd said because he mattered, and he realized something simple and terrifying. He needed her here. Not just for the children, not just for the house, but for the quiet parts of himself he'd long stopped tending. He whispered into the night, not sure if he was praying or confessing. Maybe God sends family in pieces, not in blood. The wind caught the words and carried them off across the pasture. Unseen behind the half-open door, Clara stood listening. She hadn't meant to overhear, but the sound of his voice, low, cracked with honesty, cut through her like light through water. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears slipping free before she could stop them. Not from sorrow this time, but from something gentler relief, maybe, or the ache of being seen. She turned back to her room, wiping her cheeks. The lamp flickered on the small table, casting long shadows over the bed. Beside it lay the unfinished shawl she'd been sewing for weeks, tiny stitches meant for no one in particular. She sat, fingers brushing the soft wool. It felt different tonight. No longer something to fill silence, but something waiting to be given. Her lips trembled with a whisper no one heard. Maybe he does. The rain came at dawn, gentle at first, then steady as breath. It soaked the earth and turned the yard to slow-moving pools of brown water inside the house. Everything felt smaller, warm, close, touched by the smell of coffee and damp wood. Clara Morgan sat at the table, patching the hem of Maggie's dress while the children played by the hearth. Outside, the world had gone quiet except for the rain's hush against the windows. Eli had gone to the barn early. He said the roof leaked near the tack wall, and a man couldn't let weather do what it pleased. Clara smiled when he said that, because that was Eli all over. He couldn't control life, but he'd still try to fix what dripped. She rose to refill the kettle. As she reached for the tin of coffee, her eyes caught on a small wooden box, half hidden on the top shelf beside the stove. Not curiosity, just accident. It was weathered, edges dark with handling. She pulled it down carefully. Inside lay a few keepsakes, a small lock of hair tied with blue ribbon, a folded letter, and a photograph faded, corners worn. The picture stopped her. A younger Eli stood beside a woman, sunlight caught in both their eyes. She was plain but striking, with a calm smile and a hand resting over her belly as if cradling something unseen. Clara traced the outline with her thumb. The name written faintly on the back Hannah. She didn't mean to stare long, but something about the woman's expression soft, knowing, held her there. It was like looking into another life she'd never lived, but somehow understood. Footsteps behind her. Didn't mean to sneak up, Eli said quietly. Clara turned, startled. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. He raised a hand. No harm done. He stepped closer, looking at the photograph in her hand. Hannah, he said simply. My wife. The word wife lingered in the air. Neither sharp nor tender, just true. Clara offered the photo back, unsure what to say. She looks kind. She was... He took it gently, eyes on the face he'd once known better than his own. Kind, stubborn, full of ideas that didn't fit the times. Clara nodded, silent. After a long pause, he added, she couldn't have children either. Clara's breath caught. Oh, we tried. Doctor said no. She took it hard, blamed herself. He sighed, setting the photo on the table. I told her it didn't change what we were, but I don't think she ever believed me. Outside, thunder rolled far away, slow, like a heart remembering how to beat. Eli leaned against the wall, hat in his hands. We adopted Luke soon after, found him after the fire north of Billings. She said it was God's way of filling empty arms. He smiled faintly. She was right. For a while. What happened to her? Clara asked softly. Fever. Came fast. Took her before I could fetch the doctor. The rain filled the silence that followed, soft and relentless. Clara didn't move. She'd known loss, but hearing it from his voice steady, resigned, brought it near again. When he finally spoke, his voice had a rough edge. She's been gone 8 years now, and some days it still feels like I just buried her yesterday. He looked up at Clara, then really looked. You probably think it's foolish, me holding on this long. No, she said quietly. I think it's human. Their eyes met. Something deep and unguarded passed between them. Recognition again, like the first time they'd spoken truth on that porch. Two people carrying the same invisible weight, realizing the other had been walking beside them all along. Eli turned the photo over once more, thumb rubbing the edge. She was a good woman. I reckon I still owe her something for the life she wanted us to have. Clara hesitated. And what life was that he looked out the window. Rain blurred the view, turning the world to watercolor. A house full of laughter, a reason to come home that wasn't just work. I suppose I've been trying to keep that promise. Clara swallowed hard. And I suppose I'm afraid I'm just the ghost, helping you keep it. The words slipped out before she could stop them, her cheeks flushed with shame. Eli's gaze softened, heavy with understanding. You're not her, Clara, I know, but sometimes I worry I'm only here because she's not. He shook his head slowly. That's not how it is. Then how is it? He took a long breath. It's confusing. I didn't plan to care again. Didn't think I could. He met her eyes, honest and unguarded. But you walk into a quiet house, and suddenly it ain't quiet anymore. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to reach for him, to touch his hand, but fear kept her still. Fear of taking something that wasn't truly offered. He went on, voice quieter. I feel like I'm standing between two lives, one I lost and one I don't quite know how to begin. She nodded slowly. I think I understand that. I think... Their silence wasn't empty. It was full of what neither dared to say. Finally, Clara whispered, maybe we're both trying to finish what someone else started. Eli looked at her, then not as a ghost of something past, but as the woman standing right there, rainlight in her hair, eyes steady and kind. He nodded once. Maybe so. Outside, the storm began to ease. The rain softened into mist. He took the photo and set it back in the box, closing the lid gently. Best keep it safe, he said. Clara brushed her fingers along the edge of the table. Safe doesn't mean forgotten. He met her gaze again. No, it doesn't. That night, as the children slept and the rain gave way to a quiet drizzle, Clara stood by the window of her small room. She could see Eli's lantern moving through the barn, steady and sure, his shadow following close behind. She wondered if grief ever truly left, or if it simply learned to make room for something else. She turned down the lamp, whispering into the dark. Maybe that's what love is, what's left when everything else has gone. By late summer, the sky above Hart Range had turned the color of pewter. Storm clouds waited over the mountains, heavy with unspent rain. The air carried that restless feeling, the kind that made animals uneasy, and men looked toward the road for trouble. It came on a weekday, quiet as any other. Clara was shelling beans on the porch while Ruth hummed nearby and Maggie tried to teach her doll to sit upright. Eli was in the yard, mending the gate, when the sound of hoofbeats broke the calm. A rider was coming fast, coat, dark, hat low, papers sticking from his saddlebag. The man reined in sharp at the fence, dust swirling around the horse's legs. Mr. Eli Hart. Eli straightened, jaw set. That's right. The man swung down. Boots too clean for ranch work. Name's Carl Everett. Territory Welfare Office. Clara stood, heart tightening at the formal tone. Luke stepped out from the barn, eyes wary. Everett opened his satchel, pulled out a folded document stamped with red wax. There's been a report, he said flatly. 4 minors residing on this property with no legal guardianship on record. Eli's shoulders stiffened. They're my family. Not by blood, Everett replied, and not by law. He handed over the notice, words heavy with bureaucracy, colder than any winter wind. It declared that the children, Luke, Ruth, Maggie, and another name half blotted by ink, were to be relocated within 10 days to the Helena Territorial Orphanage, pending review. Clara's breath caught. Ruth's hand found hers instinctively. Luke's face hardened like flint. Eli read the paper once, slow, then folded it without looking at the man. Who filed this? Doesn't matter, Everett said. Our records show you never registered for adoption. No minister, no court seal. Can't have folks collecting children without authority. Collecting Clara's voice rose before she could stop it. He's raising them, not collecting them. Everett's eyes flicked toward her, polite but unmoved. Ma'am, I understand this is emotional, but rules are rules. The state's got standards for proper care. Eli stepped closer, voice low but edged. You think I don't care for 'em? You think any orphanage in Helena can do better than what they got here? I'm not here to argue, Everett replied, tightening his gloves. Just deliver notice. He tipped his hat, turned toward his horse. You've got until next Friday. I'll be back. The sound of hooves faded down the road, leaving behind silence sharp enough to hurt. Clara looked at Eli. The muscles in his jaw worked once, then stilled. He stood staring at the folded paper as if it were a snake he couldn't bring himself to kill. Ruth began to cry softly. Maggie clung to her leg. Luke kicked the porch rail, voice trembling with anger. They can't take us. They can't. Eli didn't answer. He just knelt and pulled Luke close. I'll fix it, he said, though his voice sounded like gravel. I promise. Clara crouched beside them. We will, she said firmly. All of us. Ruth looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. Are we bad? Is that why they want to take us? No. Sweetheart, Clara whispered, brushing her hair back. You're good. You're everything good in this world. They just don't understand yet. The girl nodded, confused but comforted. Luke stood silent now, fists clenched at his sides, eyes fixed on the horizon. He was old enough to know what words like law and authority could do to a life. That evening, the ranch felt smaller. The laughter that usually drifted from the kitchen was gone. Even the fire burned quieter, as if trying not to draw attention. Eli sat at the table, the paper unfolded before him. He'd read it a dozen times, but the letters didn't change. He'd fought storms, wild horses, and hunger, but not this. This was a different kind of enemy, one that came dressed in rules and ink. Clara watched from across the room, her hands gripping her skirt to keep them from shaking. Finally, she said, we can fight this. He looked up, eyes tired. With what? They've got laws, signatures, offices in town. All I've got is this land and what's on it. Then we'll make that enough. Eli almost smiled, but it broke before it reached his eyes. They'll take them. Clara. She stepped forward, voice trembling but sure. Not while I'm breathing. The words hung in the air like lightning before thunder. Eli looked at her. Really looked. There was no fear in her face, only fierce resolve. He rose slowly. You'd stand against the law for us. I'd stand against heaven itself if it tried to take them. He exhaled, long and low. For the first time since the lawman's arrival, something in him eased a small, fragile hope. Clara moved to the window. The first drops of rain began to fall again, soft against the glass. She whispered to herself, "They said I couldn't be a mother. Maybe they were wrong." That night, the children slept light and uneasy. Every creak of the house made Maggie stir. Every gust of wind made Ruth whisper in her dreams. Clara stayed awake, candle burning low, writing letters first to the preacher, then to neighbors, to anyone who might lend a name or a word of defense. Her handwriting trembled, but her will did not. She signed each letter simply. Clara Morgan, teacher of the Hart children. Eli passed by once, pausing in the doorway. "You don't have to do this alone." She didn't look up. "You said once you built this place with your own hands. Let me help hold it together." He nodded, silent. When she finally set down her pen, the rain had stopped. The world outside smelled of wet earth and new resolve. She blew out the candle and sat for a long while, listening to the slow, steady breathing of the children in the next room. Her chest ached, but it wasn't despair. It was the sound of something worth fighting for. And somewhere in the dark, Eli Hart whispered into his folded hands, "Maybe this time we'll make the world listen." By sundown, the sky had gone black with rain, not the gentle kind, the kind that means to test you. Clouds rolled heavy over the valley, pressing low, swallowing light. The first drops came fat and slow, spattering against the porch. Then the heavens opened. Within minutes, the yard turned to river. Wind slammed the shutters. The barn groaned like it remembered every storm that had come before. Inside the house, Clara Morgan was holding Maggie in her arms. The child's skin burned hot against her chest, fever fierce and climbing fast. "Eli," she called, voice cutting through the roar of rain. He came running from the porch, soaked through, eyes sharp. "What is it?" "It's Maggie," she gasped. "She's burning up, she won't wake." He was beside them in an instant, hand pressed to the girl's forehead. Her breath came shallow, quick. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once before in the last days of his wife's fever. "The doctor," Clara said. "He's in town 20 miles. Eli looked toward the window. Rain blurred the world into gray. "Bridge won't hold. River's over by now. Then what do we do?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze moved to the child, then to Clara, her face pale with fear, but steady as ever. He swallowed hard. "I ride." She shook her head. "You can't. You'll drown before you're halfway there." "A father rides," he said quietly. "That's what he does. Eli, please." He was already pulling on his coat, the oilskin slick and patched from years of use. She followed him to the porch, rain lashing her hair flat against her cheeks. "Listen to me," she cried over the wind. "If you die out there," he turned, rain streaming from his hat brim, "then I die trying. That little girl, she's counting on me. All of them are." Clara's voice broke. "So am I." He paused, just for a heartbeat. Then he reached out, rough hand against her cheek, thumb brushing away rain and tears alike. His voice softened. "You take care of them till I get back." Then he was gone, boots pounding across the mud, the gate slamming behind him. The horse whinnied, spooked, but he mounted fast and kicked off into the storm. Lightning split the sky, carving his silhouette against the white flash for an instant, and then the night swallowed him whole. Inside, time twisted. The rain drummed like 1,000 fists on the roof. The wind shoved at the walls. Clara sat by the hearth with Maggie on her lap, sponging her forehead, whispering prayers she half remembered from childhood. Luke and Ruth crouched nearby, silent, frightened. "Is Pa coming back?" Luke asked, voice trembling. Clara looked toward the window, where only darkness moved. "If it's for one of you," she said softly, "he'd ride through anything." Ruth buried her face in Clara's sleeve. Maggie stirred, murmuring nonsense, her small hand twitching in fevered dreams. "Stay with me, baby," Clara whispered. "Stay." Hours crawled by. The fire burned low. Every minute stretched like rope about to break. Rain beat the roof in steady fury. Once, the sound of something crashing outside a tree or fence post made Luke flinch. Then, just as Clara felt her strength start to fade, there came a sound faint, then louder. Hoofbeats. She froze, not daring to believe. The noise grew until it filled the yard, splashing water. A voice shouting hoarse. She ran to the door, flung it open. Rain stung her face. There he was, Eli Hart, mud to his knees, coat torn, eyes wild with exhaustion. He was half dragging, half guiding another man, a figure hunched in the saddle, clutching a black bag. "The doctor." Eli rasped. "Got him." Clara rushed forward, catching his arm as he nearly stumbled. "You made it, dear God. You made it." The doctor slid from his horse, shaking the rain from his hat. "Where's the patient?" Clara led him inside, quickly explaining, between breaths. He knelt beside Maggie, unrolling his instruments, muttering about fever, lungs, the need for rest and ginger tea. Clara followed every word, every motion, ready with whatever he needed. Behind them, Eli swayed on his feet. Water dripped from his coat, pooling at his boots. He tried to speak, but only managed a rasp of air. "Sit down," Clara ordered, turning just in time to see him stumble against the wall. He slid to the floor, face pale, lips blue. "Did she'll live," the doctor said without looking up. "You, on the other hand, need heat and sleep before you go down, too." Clara was already kneeling beside him, hands gripping his shoulders. "Eli, look at me." He tried, but his eyes were unfocused, lids heavy. "Couldn't let her die." He murmured, "Not her. Not again." "Shh. Don't talk." She pulled his coat off, tossed it aside, and wrapped him in blankets by the fire. His skin was ice cold. She rubbed his hands, his arms, his face, anything to bring him back from the edge. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, 2 lives hung in its balance, one small and burning, one large and fading. Minutes, maybe hours, passed before Maggie's breathing eased, her fever breaking in damp relief. The doctor nodded once, satisfied. "She's through the worst." Clara's relief came in a sob she didn't expect. Then she turned back to Eli, still slumped, still shivering, but alive. She pressed a hand to his cheek. "You stubborn fool," she whispered. "You did it." His lips moved in the faintest ghost of a smile. "Didn't have much choice," he breathed. "A father rides." Then his eyes closed, his body giving in to the exhaustion that had been waiting for him. She caught him as he sagged forward, held him tight, and whispered, "Then rest, Cowboy. You've done enough riding for one night." By dawn, the storm had passed. The valley lay drenched and shining under a new sky. Smoke curled from the chimney again, thin, hopeful. Clara stood by the window, watching the light creep over the fields. Behind her, Maggie slept peacefully, and Eli lay near the hearth, color slowly returning to his face. For the first time, Clara let herself cry quietly, freely. Not from fear this time, but from gratitude. Outside, water dripped from the eaves, one drop at a time, steady, patient, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The storm had broken sometime before dawn. When light came, it came shyly gray first, then gold, crawling slow across the wet boards of the porch and through the open curtains. The land outside was washed clean, glistening under the early sun. Water pooled in the yard, the barn roof steamed, and the valley smelled of new beginnings, mud, pine, and hope. Inside the house, the fire still crackled low. Clara Morgan sat near it, half asleep in the chair she hadn't left all night, across from her. Eli Hart lay wrapped in blankets, pale but breathing steady. His chest rose and fell like the slow tide of a river, finally calming. The doctor was packing his satchel. "She'll mend," he said, nodding toward the small bed where Maggie slept. Color back in her cheeks. Fever's gone. Child stronger than she looks. Clara's eyes filled, relief cutting through her fatigue. Thank God. The doctor gave her a tired smile. And thank your man here. He near drowned, getting me through that pass. Eli stirred at the sound of his name. His eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to recognition. "You're still here," he whispered. Clara leaned forward, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "Where else would I be?" He tried to smile, but it came out more as a breath. "The doctor make it?" "He did. And so did you." He turned his head toward Maggie's cot. "She's all right." Clara nodded, voice thick. "Because of you." He closed his eyes again, whispering something she almost didn't catch. Worth every mile. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high enough to turn puddles to mirrors. Luke and Ruth had started chores on their own, feeding the chickens, fetching water, sweeping the porch like they were afraid the day might vanish if they stopped moving. Clara stepped outside to breathe the clean air. Her body ached, but her heart felt light for the first time in days. She looked over the hills and thought, maybe the worst has passed. That was when she heard it, the distant clip of hooves. 2 riders, this time, approaching slow along the muddy road. Her chest tightened. The memory of the last visitor, that man with his papers and polished boots, came rushing back. She straightened her shoulders, wiped her hands on her apron, and waited. The riders stopped at the gate. One was Carl Everett, the same government agent, but this time his posture was different, less rigid, almost cautious. The other was a younger man in a gray coat, carrying a leather case. "Miss Morgan." Everett called. "Is Miss Hart about?" "He's resting," Clara said, firm but polite. "What brings you?" The younger man dismounted first, tipping his hat. "Official business," he said. "We come bearing new orders." Her stomach turned cold. Then Everett spoke again, softer than before. "The removal notice has been rescinded." Clara blinked. What he reached into his coat, producing a sealed envelope. "Community letters came in. Half the county wrote on your behalf. The preacher, the storekeeper, even the doctor down in town." He paused, glancing at her with something like respect. "And your own letter, it did the rest." Clara took the envelope in both hands, her fingers trembling. Inside, on crisp parchment, the words were simple but life-changing. Order withdrawn. Guardianship under review. Temporary custody approved, pending confirmation. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The world seemed to tilt, the ground unsteady with joy. Everett cleared his throat. Territory office figured if a man nearly drowns saving a child that's not his by blood, He's earned the right to keep her. He gave a dry, almost embarrassed smile. Don't see that in the rulebook, but it felt right. Clara's eyes stung. Thank you, she whispered. The two men nodded, mounted their horses again, and rode off slow, mud splattering behind them. She stood there long after they'd gone, the paper clutched to her chest, rain drying on her face, though it hadn't fallen for hours. When she stepped back inside, Luke was crouched by Eli's chair, whispering something that made the man smile faintly. Ruth was braiding Maggie's hair, humming an off-key lullaby. For a moment, the scene felt like something out of a dream, soft, real, unshakably whole. They came, Clara said quietly. Eli looked up, eyes questioning. She held up the letter. They're not taking them. The silence that followed was sacred. Then Luke whooped loud enough to wake the whole valley. Ruth ran to Clara, arms tight around her waist. Maggie, still weak, smiled in her sleep. Eli exhaled slow, long like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. He reached out his hand, rough and steady. Clara took it without hesitation. He squeezed once. You did this. She shook her head. We did. No, he said, voice low but sure. You spoke for us when I couldn't. Tears welled in her eyes again. I just told them the truth. And what truth was that? That family doesn't come from paper. He nodded, emotion flickering across his tired face. Guess they finally believed it. Later. As the sun sank low over the soaked valley, the house felt alive again. The children played cards on the floor. The kettle hissed. Smoke curled lazy from the chimney. Clara stood by the window, watching light fade into gold. Eli stirred in the chair beside her. Luke leaned his head against his father's shoulder, too proud to call it comfort, too young to hide that it was. Ruth crawled into Clara's lap, clutching her shawl. Her voice was small, but certain. We're home now, aren't we? Clara looked at her. Then, at the room, the worn floor, the half-mended curtains, the man who had nearly died for them, and the children who had given her back her heart. She nodded once, unable to speak. Her smile trembled, but it stayed. Tears fell quietly down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered finally. We're home. Weeks passed like the slow drift of clouds after rain. The world had quieted. Grass grew green again. The children laughed freely now, their voices echoing across the fields like bells after a storm. The heart range had settled into a rhythm, a humble one, but true. Mornings began with the creak of the windmill, the clatter of dishes, and Maggie's chatter about her doll's adventures. Clara's voice filled the kitchen, calm, warm, steady the heartbeat of the house. That morning, Eli Hart tried to help. It didn't go well. Pan's too hot, Clara said, watching him struggle with the eggs. I got it, he muttered, flipping the spatula too quick. The yolk splattered, hissing across the stove. Ruth giggled. Luke smirked behind his coffee cup. Even Maggie, still drowsy from sleep, covered her mouth to hide her laughter. Eli sighed, setting the blackened pan aside. Guess I'm better with a hammer than a skillet? Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. You're better with everything except breakfast. He smiled the rare, unguarded kind. It lit his face in a way she hadn't seen before, a trace of the boy he once was, before life turned heavy. Well, he said, wiping his hands, maybe I'll try again tomorrow. Maybe I'll hide the eggs. She teased. Laughter filled the kitchen, easy, unforced, like sunlight through lace curtains. It was the sound of a family learning peace again. Later that morning, Clara found a folded note on the counter, written in Eli's rough, square handwriting. Everything you do for them, let me do for you today. E. She smiled, holding the paper against her chest for a moment longer than she meant to. The man could mend a fence, break a horse, or build a barn from nothing, but when he wrote, it was always simple, straight from the bone. She went outside to find him fixing the corral post, sleeves rolled to his elbows, sawdust clinging to his arms. When he noticed her, he gave that quiet half smile. You got my note. I did. Well, he said, nodding toward the porch steps, might not have cornbread or poetry, but I can clean the trough, fetch water, split wood. She tilted her head. That's not doing for me. That's just chores. He shrugged. Playful. I never was good at poetry. Clara laughed, and for a moment, the air felt young again. Evening came soft and gold. The sky over Montana stretched wide and forgiving. The children played near the barn, chasing fireflies that winked in the tall grass. Inside, the lamp flickered low. Clara sat sewing near the hearth, the sound of crickets drifting through the open window. Eli stood by the table, quiet, his rough hands fidgeting with the brim of his hat. Clara, he said finally. She looked up. His tone was different, not uncertain, but weighted, careful. He cleared his throat. You said once you couldn't have children. She nodded, eyes steady. I did. He took a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep. But you've raised them more than I ever could. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. They're your family. Eli, you built this. He shook his head slowly. I built a house. You made it a home. The silence that followed was soft but full, the kind that says more than words ever could. He moved closer, stopping just in front of her. The lamplight caught the edges of his face, lined, strong, but gentle now. I never was much for speeches, he said. Don't have fine words like some, but I know what I mean. She waited, heart quiet but beating hard. He knelt slightly, not fully, just enough that his eyes met hers, level and certain. His voice, when it came, was low and rough with feeling. Stay, he said simply, not as a teacher, not as a guest. Stay as their mother, and as my wife. For a moment. She couldn't breathe. The sound of the wind outside, the ticking clock, even the crickets seemed to fade. Her fingers tightened around the fabric in her lap. Every word she'd ever been told that she was broken, unfit, less all of it, rose like ghosts. But then she saw the truth in his eyes. Not pity, not charity, just love, quiet and steady as the land itself. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, rough, calloused, warm, held it tight. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Eli exhaled, half relief, half wonder. Good, he whispered. We'll make do with love. He leaned forward just enough to rest his forehead against hers. The lamp hissed softly beside them. The house around them was silent but alive, the kind of silence that means everything's finally right. Outside. Luke peeked through the half-open doorway. Ruth beside him. He grinned, whispering, Told you. Ruth elbowed him, but she was smiling too. They slipped back toward the porch, where Maggie had fallen asleep in a quilt, a firefly jar glowing faintly beside her. Above them, the night sky stretched endless and clear, a sky washed clean of storm and sorrow. Somewhere out in that wide dark, a coyote called, answered by another farther off. Life went on simple, wild, and whole. Inside, Eli and Clara sat hand in hand, the fire burning low, the warmth of love new and familiar at once, and for the first time in all the long, wandering years, both of them knew they had found what they weren't even sure they were looking for. Spring came to the Hart Range like an old friend. The snows melted slow, giving way to the first blades of green that pushed through the thawing soil. The river, once swollen with flood, now ran clear and bright, whispering against smooth stones, carrying the scent of life renewed. For the first time in years, the land felt at peace. Eli mended fences, not out of worry, but habit. Luke followed close behind, learning the rhythm of a man's work by watching more than listening. Ruth hung laundry on the line, her laughter tangled with the wind. Maggie, always barefoot now, ran after a stray chicken that refused to be civilized, and Clara Morgan, soon to be Clara Hart, stood beneath the great oak behind the house, her hands dusted with flour from baking bread. She looked up at the wide sky, clean, endless, forgiving, and let herself smile. That oak tree had seen more of their story than any soul alive. It had shaded them through sorrow, through the storm, through quiet nights when they thought all might be lost. Now it would bear witness to something entirely new. The neighbors began to arrive just before noon. A preacher from town, Mrs. Kearns, the storekeeper's wife, with her best pie balanced like a crown. Even old man Dalton, who'd sworn he didn't care for company, came carrying a loaf of bread and a rare grin. There were no ribbons, no decorations, no choir, just a few rows of chairs borrowed from the church and a table holding a plate of fresh bread, 2 tin cups, and a pair of plain copper bands shaped and polished by the blacksmith who'd once fixed Eli's plow. The air smelled of lilac and clean earth. Somewhere in the distance, the river murmured its approval. Luke stood tall beside his father, wearing his one good shirt. Ruth held Maggie's hand, both girls clutching wildflowers gathered that morning. The preacher cleared his throat, opened his Bible, then smiled. Sometimes, he said, the best weddings are the ones heaven already saw coming. Eli looked at Clara, eyes steady, voice quiet. I can't promise riches, he said, but I can promise this. You'll never wonder if you belong. Clara's breath caught, tears bright in her eyes. I don't need riches, she whispered, just this place. And you? He reached for her hands, small against his, but strong. The preacher nodded once. By the grace of God, and the witness of all gathered here, I pronounce you man and wife. No one cheered right away. It was as if the moment itself wanted silence to breathe, to settle deep in every heart there. Then Maggie clapped her tiny hands. Ruth laughed. Luke whooped loud enough to startle the birds. Eli grinned, pulling Clara close, pressing his forehead to hers. The crowd laughed softly, wiping their eyes, smiling the way people do when they see something good and simple made whole. Afterward, the tables filled with bread and pie, with tin cups of cider passed hand to hand, children ran wild through the field. Neighbors lingered in the shade, swapping stories about weather and grace. Clara sat on the porch for a while, her cream-colored dress catching bits of dust and sunlight. Eli joined her, boots muddy, coat slightly wrinkled, and happier than she'd ever seen him. He leaned against the rail, gazing out over the hills. Never thought I'd see the day, he said. What day's that, she teased. The one where a man like me gets more than he ever asked for. She smiled. You earned it. Eli Hart. He shook his head. No, we all did. As afternoon faded to gold, the children gathered near the oak, tugging at a spool of string. Ruth laughed as the kite. A patchwork thing made from old linen and paint lifted into the wind. Maggie squealed when it caught an updraft, soaring high above the ranch, its tail fluttering bright against the blue. Eli slipped an arm around Clara's shoulders. Looks like they're trying to touch heaven. She leaned into him. Maybe they already have. For a while, they just watched the kite dancing, the children running, laughter spilling across the field like sunlight, no words needed, no grand declarations, just the steady truth of being together. I used to think home was built by blood, that you needed a name, a past, a claim to belong somewhere. But turns out, home is built by staying even when the wind tells you to go. It's built by hands that choose to mend instead of let go. By hearts that open when the world says they shouldn't. That's how the Hart Range was built. Not by law, not by luck, but by love that refused to leave. The camera of the Hart pulls wide, the house small but glowing in the distance. Children's laughter fades into the hum of wind and wings. The kite drifts higher until it's a speck against the sky. And the voice, one last time. Maybe that's all. Family is people who stay when the storm ends. Out on the frontier, where the wind could strip a man down to his soul. Eli and Clara learned something. Many of us forget family isn't found in blood, it's built in the staying. The world may call you broken, barren, or unfit, but love has a way of proving the world wrong. Sometimes life doesn't give us what we expected. It gives us the chance to care for what's left standing. Their story reminds us that strength isn't loud, and devotion isn't grand, it's in the small. Daily acts of showing up, in every hand that mends without complaint, every heart that chooses to remain when it could walk away. For those of us who have lived long enough to lose something, someone this tale says you still have more to give. Home isn't where you began. It's where you keep returning. And even when the world tells you it's too late to start again, love will quietly answer, no, it's just time. Hold fast, stay kind, keep riding, because somewhere, someone is waiting for your kind of love to make them whole again. Thank you, friends, for riding with us through this story, through wind, rain, and the quiet heart of the West. If this tale touched you, if it reminded you that love can outlast loss and that family is something we build with our own hands, then help us keep these fires burning. Hit that like button to show your support, share this story with someone who still believes in second chances, and subscribe to Wild West Echoes so you won't miss the next journey under these wide, forgiving skies. Until our next ride, stay gentle, stay brave, and remember, the frontier of the heart is never too far to come home.